Picture this. You're at a Silicon Valley party.
Okay.
The drinks are flowing, people are mingling, and the guy who runs the biggest online bookstore in the world corners you.
Naturally.
Right. But he doesn't want to talk about literature. He aggressively interrogates you about the logistical supply chain of human sperm donation.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
It is. But that is exactly how veteran tech journalist Kara Swisher first understood Jeff Bezos. To him, human reproduction wasn't a social convention. It was, just another supply chain waiting to be optimized.
It's a jarring image, but it perfectly encapsulates the strange reality of the tech boom.
Totally.
If you look at the early days of the digital revolution, the narrative sold to the public was almost entirely framed as this utopian project. It was about democratization, connecting humanity, breaking down walls.
Which is so hard to reconcile with the reality of today. We're essentially living in the shadow of tech monopolies now.
Yeah, we really are.
But for today's deep dive, we have this perfect lens to understand how that shift actually happened. We're looking at excerpts from Kara Swisher's memoir, Burn Book.
And she is definitely the right person for this.
Exactly. She had a front row seat to this evolution for over 3 decades.
And what makes Swisher's perspective so invaluable is her reporting style. She famously adopted what one of her former bosses called a stab-you-in-the-front approach.
I love that phrase.
Right. She was never interested in access journalism or being a sycophant. She was just completely fearless. She would tell these titans exactly what she thought right to their faces.
Which is rare.
Very rare. But it allowed her to see past the carefully cultivated PR shields they always put up.
So the journey we're tracking today through Swisher's eyes is how Silicon Valley mutated. We're basically charting the path from the innocent sort of Star Trek utopianism of the early internet.
Where everyone is ostensibly working together for the greater good.
Exactly. From that to what Swisher describes as a Star Wars reality. A reality where the dark side of unchecked power, hyperscale, and just ruthless capitalism ultimately wins out.
Yeah, and to really grasp how we arrived at the dark side, we have to examine the environment that birthed it. The meet-cute phase of the tech boom in the 1990s.
Which is so fascinating. And Swisher herself had this profound digital epiphany during that era while she was at Duke University.
She did. Well, she was messing around on the university's network and she downloaded a Calvin and Hobbes comic.
Which seems harmless.
Right, but the file size was so massive for the time that it completely crashed the university's entire computer system.
Oh, man.
And the system administrator was furious, obviously. But rather than feeling guilty, Swisher had this moment of total clarity. She realized, everything that can be digitized will be digitized.
What's remarkable is that she immediately understood the mechanics of that disruption. While others just saw a crashed server, she recognized that if you could digitize one comic, a single computer could hold all the comics.
Exactly. A digitized song meant all the songs.
Right. She saw the dawn of a completely frictionless delivery system for all of human knowledge, just totally devoid of physical constraints.
And she was uniquely equipped to cover the people building this new system because, she was inherently immune to the aura of power.
Oh, for sure. The sources include this fantastic anecdote from her early career in Washington, D.C. She was working for John McLaughlin.
Who is notorious.
Yeah, a notoriously abusive, powerful TV host. He demanded his staff do things like make his toast. And Swisher just flat out refused.
Good for her.
Seriously. And later at a party, he tries to intimidate her by bragging about all the important politicians coming to pay him homage.
And she just looks at him and says, Babylon was.
It's such a devastating 3-word response.
It really is. It means that every major empire, no matter how invincible it feels in the moment, eventually falls. It demonstrated that she understood the ephemeral nature of power.
Meaning she wasn't going to be blinded by the billions of dollars these tech founders would eventually amass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which was the perfect armor for Silicon Valley. Because when she arrived, she found a culture that felt completely alien compared to traditional corporate America.
Right. It was this bizarre man-boy culture. You had Netscape's Mark Andreessen eating endless plates of eggs at a diner and communicating almost entirely in internet memes.
Yeah. And Yahoo installing a giant red twisty slide between floors of their headquarters.
Or a playground.
Literally. These offices were packed with ball pits, bouncy balls, free laundry. Swisher actually compares it to Pinocchio's Pleasure Island.
Which is so vivid. I kind of view it like a modern gold rush. But instead of prospectors covered in dirt, you have these guys in fleece hoodies holding meetings in ball pits.
That's a perfect analogy.
But I have to ask, Was all this performative innocence, the toys, the childishness, did it actually help them innovate? Or was it just a smokescreen to hide their cutthroat capitalism from the traditional business world?
I mean, it absolutely functioned as a smokescreen, whether it was entirely conscious at first or not. If you present your company as a group of playful, idealistic nerds just trying to connect the world, the public is naturally charmed.
You don't see them as a threat.
Right. And more importantly, government regulators are much less likely to view you as a predatory monopoly. It essentially bought them years of unregulated runway to build their empires.
And nobody shattered that illusion of harmlessness quite like Jeff Bezos. Going back to that party anecdote, Swisher explicitly describes him in the text as a feral mongoose.
A feral mongoose. It's so accurate.
He wasn't wearing a fleece hoodie and pretending to save the world. He came from Wall Street.
Precisely. Bezos stands in stark contrast to that typical Silicon Valley man-boy archetype. He wasn't building a digital toy.
Yeah.
He was building a ruthless, hyper-optimized, math-driven logistics machine that just happened to masquerade as a humble online bookstore.
Which explains why he was so obsessed with the logistics of sperm donation at a cocktail party. To him, a social boundary is just an inefficiency. He was relentlessly mapping out systems.
And while Bezos proved that mapping physical logistics was, a license to print money, guys like Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google realized there was something even more valuable to map.
Human intent.
Exactly. Human intent. Google is the perfect case study for how that early smokescreen of innocence mutated. Page and Brin literally put the motto, "Don't be evil," into their IPO prospectus.
Which is wild in hindsight.
It is. They presented themselves to the world as the quirky, benevolent librarians of the internet, operating out of Susan Wojcicki's garage.
But the mechanisms behind their growth were incredibly predatory. Just look at their relationship with Yahoo.
Oh, that's a classic example.
Yahoo was the giant at the time, right? But they treated search like a human-curated directory, whereas Google treated search as an algorithm that learned and improved from every single click.
So when Yahoo outsourced their search queries to Google's engine to save money, they thought they were just making a smart business deal.
Right. But in reality, they were feeding Google the massive volume of raw data needed to train the algorithm that would eventually destroy them. Yahoo effectively trained its own assassin.
That is the power of a self-improving system.
Yeah.
And once Google realized the true value of that data, the whole "don't be evil" philosophy quickly took a back seat to the imperative of scale.
We see this so vividly when they decided to scan all the world's books. They didn't ask publishers for permission. They didn't negotiate complex licensing deals beforehand.
Nope. They just unleashed their technology, vacuumed up the intellectual property, and basically accepted the resulting lawsuits as the cost of doing business.
Because in their minds, organizing the world's information was this crusade that superseded traditional concepts of copyright or ownership.
It's this terrifying pivot where explosive growth becomes a religion. When a company prioritizes scale above absolutely everything else, ethical concerns, privacy violations, and even global political consequences are just treated as operational bugs, things to be patched in the next software update.
And no single figure personifies that scale over safety mindset more deeply than Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, absolutely.
Swisher notes a highly revealing detail about him in the book. His childhood hero wasn't a computer scientist or an inventor. It was the Roman Emperor Augustus Caesar.
That detail explains so much about Facebook's trajectory. I mean, Augustus Caesar achieved the Pax Romana, 200 years of relative peace across the empire. But he did it through a notoriously harsh, authoritarian approach.
And Zuckerberg didn't just study that. He admired the trade-off. He accepted the grim collateral damage of empire building as a necessary cost for global connection.
But that imperial mindset eventually collides with public reality. And Swisher was there for one of the most visceral examples of it.
The 2010 All Things Digital interview.
Yes. Swisher and her co-host Walt Mossberg were pressing Zuckerberg hard on Facebook's repeated privacy violations. And Zuckerberg, who was so used to absolute control, began to physically panic. He was pouring sweat on stage.
He's having a total meltdown.
Yeah.
And Swisher, who is legitimately worried he's going to pass out, suggests he take off his signature hoodie.
And when he finally peels it off, he reveals this bizarre Illuminati-style crest stamped on the inside lining.
Right. It had the company's mission statement, making the world more open and connected, surrounded by these intense arrows. It looked like the emblem of a cult.
It really demonstrated how deeply, almost fanatically, that mission of global connection was internalized within the company.
But it highlights a fatal structural flaw.
Yeah.
The problem with absolute frictionless connection is that it connects bad actors, propagandists, and extremists just as efficiently as it connects friends and family.
Exactly. And Zuckerberg's education on that front was incredibly expensive, not for him, but for society.
Yeah. If you've ever found yourself endlessly scrolling through your feed, getting progressively more enraged at the news, Swisher points out that this isn't an accident.
No, it's baked into the design.
In 2016, Zuckerberg traveled to Beijing and posted a naive photo of himself happily jogging through Tiananmen Square, just completely blind to the historical reality of the massacre there.
And then 2 years later, he actually defended Holocaust deniers on Facebook.
Unbelievable.
He argued they shouldn't be banned because they might not, quote, intentionally be getting their facts wrong.
And it took him 2 full years of public pressure to finally reverse that policy. His defense for his moderation approach was a structural analogy. He compared running Facebook to fighting crime in a major city.
Right. He argued that you can't expect a mayor or a police department to prevent every single crime before it happens. You just try to manage it as best you can.
Okay, I cannot let that analogy stand because the mechanics of it are entirely backward. A real city is a geographic reality. Facebook is a privately engineered behavioral modification engine. Zuckerberg built the architecture of that city from the ground up. He specifically designed the streets to funnel people toward the most inflammatory events because outrage keeps them in the city longer.
Yeah, he profits directly off the crime happening in his streets.
And perhaps most importantly, unlike a real mayor, he holds the controlling voting shares of his company. He can never be voted out of office.
You've hit on the core issue there. A city is a public commons with democratic oversight. Facebook's algorithm is designed to maximize engagement, and human psychology dictates that engagement is most easily driven by enragement. It is basically a machine that monetizes friction.
So as these tech emperors expanded their digital cities, they eventually ran out of empty space and started crossing borders into territories controlled by the old guard.
They weren't just building software anymore.
Right. They were becoming the dominant media companies on Earth. And that sets up a massive culture clash. It's Silicon Valley colliding head-on with Hollywood and traditional media.
And the contrast in worldviews between these two industries was just staggering. You have the aggressive, fast-moving tech billionaires slamming into the stubborn, slow-to-adapt titans of old media.
It's like watching an unstoppable alien Borg absorb these stubborn, dinosaur-like Hollywood studios.
That's a great way to put it. And the traditional guard was paralyzed by denial. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Time Warner, famously dismissed the existential threat of Netflix by comparing them to the Albanian army trying to conquer the world.
Wow. That is a quote that aged terribly.
Horribly.
And on the flip side, you had old media guys like Rupert Murdoch thinking they could just buy their way into relevance. He dropped $580 million on MySpace, only to fundamentally misunderstand how social networks function and run it into the ground.
But Hollywood creatives were just as blind. I mean, George Lucas famously told YouTube founder Chad Hurley that an uncurated video platform was like throwing puppies on a freeway.
Puppies on a freeway. Because Lucas viewed media through the lens of crafted narrative and artistic control. To him, user-generated content was just chaotic noise.
Right. But traditional media failed to understand the underlying mechanics of what the tech companies were actually building. Hollywood operated on artificial scarcity.
Exactly. There are only so many primetime slots on television. There are only so many screens at the local multiplex. That scarcity let Hollywood control the bottleneck, decide what got made, and artificially inflate the price.
But tech companies realized that broadband internet made shelf space infinite.
Right. They didn't view a movie as a sacred communal event. They saw it as a data packet. And to them, a movie theater was just a horribly inefficient router.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when an industry built on artificial scarcity goes to war with an industry built on infinite abundance, abundance wins because they control the new distribution pipes.
But Hollywood still fought the inevitable. The Sundance Film Festival crowd openly scoffed at tech executives proposing day-and-date streaming releases, releasing movies online the same day they hit theaters.
And when Warner Media's Jason Kilar actually tried executing that strategy years later during the pandemic, powerful directors like Christopher Nolan publicly crucified him.
Again, dinosaurs yelling at an asteroid. And nobody understood the power of controlling those distribution pipes better than Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Oh, that dynamic was fascinating.
The source material details this incredible moment, the iconic 2007 joint interview they did at Swisher's conference.
Yeah, the backstage dynamics there perfectly illustrate the raw egos driving this industry.
Right before the joint session, Jobs is on stage alone and casually insults Microsoft. He says developing software for Windows is like giving a glass of ice water to somebody in hell.
Which was a calculated provocation, knowing full well that Gates was waiting in the green room, listening to every single word.
So Gates is sitting there, absolutely fuming. The tension is incredibly thick. Then Jobs walks into the green room, sees Gates glaring at him, and breaks the tension by walking over and literally handing Gates a freezing cold bottle of water.
It's a masterful power move. But it highlights the complex, almost sibling-like rivalry that pushed them to dominate the globe.
But beyond the theatrics, what is crucial about Jobs in this specific era is his prescience regarding the underlying asset of the new economy.
User data.
Exactly. While the rest of Silicon Valley was engaged in this reckless race to harvest as much behavioral data as possible, Jobs was actively sounding the alarm. He insisted that tech companies needed to ask users for permission, quote, in plain English and repeatedly.
He essentially warned them. He said, let the user know precisely what you're going to do with their data every single time. He saw the ethical cliff approaching.
Because by the mid-2010s, tech had decisively won. They absorbed old media, they owned the distribution pipes, they hoarded the data, and they possessed unimaginable wealth.
But with absolute power came their ultimate ethical test.
And Swisher's memoir suggests they failed it spectacularly when forced to choose between their stated ideals and their bottom line.
We are looking here at the intersection of big tech and political reality. Swisher highlights a massive paradox in this era, specifically centering around December 2016, shortly after the presidential election, when a summit was convened at Trump Tower.
The incoming president invited the biggest names in tech to a closed-door meeting.
And the paradox is that during the campaign, many of these exact tech leaders had taken highly publicized moral stances opposing the president-elect's rhetoric. They opposed his rhetoric on immigration, LGBTQ+ rights, and a proposed ban on Muslims entering the country.
Swisher actually called Elon Musk before the meeting took place. She explicitly warned him that he was going to get screwed by attending.
A prediction the text notes Musk later admitted was entirely accurate.
Wow. And her advice to these executives was simple. If you feel compelled to go, use the immense leverage of your platforms to make a strong public stand for the values you've spent a decade claiming to hold dear.
But instead, they quietly complied. They sneaked in through the back door to avoid the press.
Swisher actually describes them in the text as sheeple.
Yeah. The observation here is that they immediately abandoned their lofty, don't be evil rhetoric when faced with the tangible threat of government regulation.
They were suddenly much more interested in protecting their ability to repatriate foreign profits and, secure lucrative military contracts.
For Swisher, this was the moment her disillusionment fully crystallized. It was the realization that the platforms built to democratize information had been successfully weaponized by state actors and propagandists to spread misinformation and outrage.
There is a profound philosophical concept referenced in the text from Paul Virilio. When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck.
I love that quote. Let's linger on that for a second, because it's the ultimate aha moment of this entire era.
Yeah.
The negativity of a technology is invented simultaneously with its progress. The engineers who invented the like button thought they were just inventing a frictionless way to share baby photos.
Right. They didn't realize they were simultaneously inventing a psychological reinforcement engine that could be manipulated to alter elections and destabilize democracies.
The shipwreck was baked into the ship from day one.
It fundamentally changes how we view these companies. It forces the question, did these tech leaders actually change? Did they lose their moral compass along the way? Or did the massive scale of their company simply strip away the PR facade, revealing that the bottom line was always the only thing that mattered?
Well, Swisher's perspective heavily suggests the latter. The whole change-the-world utopian rhetoric was incredibly easy to maintain when they were scrappy startups operating out of garages.
Yeah.
But once they became the most highly valued corporations in human history, the fiduciary imperative to protect that valuation overrode any stated principles. The scale didn't change who they were, it just revealed who they always had been.
It is a sobering diagnostic of the modern digital landscape.
Very sobering.
So what does this all mean for you and me? We've traced a wild trajectory today. We started in the 90s with idealistic nerds crashing college networks just to read a comic strip.
A simpler time.
Really was. We watched them build ball pits and bouncy castles to mask the creation of cutthroat data monopolies. We saw them leverage infinite abundance to bulldoze the artificial scarcity of traditional media.
And finally, we saw the creation of unfireable digital emperors who, when push came to shove, sacrificed their purported values to protect their wealth.
It demands that we actively reconsider our relationship with the infrastructure we rely on daily. The machinery of the internet isn't broken, it is functioning exactly as it was designed to.
Which is the scariest part.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over. Swisher joked that our phones are our best, most intimate relationships. They are the very first thing we reach out to touch in the morning, and they're the last thing we touch before we go to sleep at night.
So true.
But if these devices and the algorithms that power them are run by modern-day Augustus Caesars who willingly prioritize engagement over safety, are we simply the citizens of a digital empire, willingly handing over the intimate details of our lives to dictators?
That's the big question.
Think about it. What happens when you finally realize that you are the natural resource being mined? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.